Well, even kind of really as a multi-use place to play baseball, not very well.
Yes. Looks like my neighbor's lawn.
Okay, don't live anywhere.
Okay, we're going. We're streaming.
All right, good evening, everybody. Welcome to our November 5th meeting for the North Dakota City Planning Commission. We're all here. So far, we've got Dwight, Jeff, and myself. Hopefully, we'll have a few more that will show up here in a minute. We'd like to begin by having a pledge. I will lead that. After which, Jeff will offer an invitation to start us off. Everybody rise.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Our Heavenly Father, we are grateful for this opportunity. Be tonight, I'm grateful for the wonderful community that we live in. Blessings. Grateful for the opportunity to serve. But ask that blessing to be upon us in our meeting this night, that we be able to be mindful of the needs of our community and the needs of the people that we serve. And we say these things in Jesus Christ. All right. Thank you. And thank you all for having us on. You know, it's not the kind of thing that we want to try and keep everybody viable and still operating and functioning. So let us begin with entertaining motion to adopt the agenda that we have outlined before us tonight. Okay,
I'll second it.
so motion by Dwight, second by Jeff. All in favor? Aye. Okay, agenda adopted. I would also entertain a motion to adopt the minutes of the previous planning commission meeting, which has been about a month ago now.
Yeah, October 8th.
October 8th. Okay. Motion to adopt the minutes. Okay, motion by Jeff. Second by Dwight, all in favor? Aye. Okay. Minutes adopted. Anything from previous meetings, especially that we need to discuss?
No updates from previous meetings in this case.
Okay, well, let us go into item number 1, consideration and possible recommendation of an ordinance. This would amend Title 8, regulation of businesses. And 8-505 special requirements for some home-based businesses to include requirements for short-term rentals as a home-based business within North Dakota City. That's give us a little bit of an introduction.
All right, yeah. So this one is in Title 8. So normally we have a public hearing when it's in Title 12. In our code, Title 8, there's no public hearing requirement. So it is actionable tonight as a draft. The Planning Commission can obviously decide if they'd like to recommend this or not. It hasn't changed much from our last discussion. The one thing that was removed was the line number 3 that talked about occupancy. That was based on a comment from the attorney saying that it was a bit tenuous, and then also looking at the parking. If we do want to have a different way to tie size to occupancy or numbers of people that can rent out, that's something we'd have to add in because that was removed for last discussion. One other thing I wanted to bring up and raise was I got emails, and I've been talking with a resident who's just had some questions about it going through the process. And she noted that we have a bed and breakfast use in our table. And she emailed me yesterday, right here, bed and breakfast lodging. And that use is not permitted in any residential zones, with the exception of the city center zones and conditional and some mixed use, the MR zones that we have very few of. So just the question of, is this short-term rental different? Do we want to add it into the table to make it a little more clear? Obviously, it doesn't have necessarily a breakfast component. Bed and breakfast is typically owned by a business entity, but I can't say that our code necessarily spells that out very well. Maybe there's some modifications. If we do want to add short-term rental in here into the table, we would need a public hearing for that because that's in Title 12. So we wouldn't be able to act on that today. So I wanted to float that by and get your thoughts on that. There was also a question raised by this resident as to if there were, excuse me, if there were going to be any restrictions on where they could be short-term rentals. If they weren't going to be allowed in the RE1 zone. I let them know that was not something we discussed, that it was kind of going to be in all residential zones just to register and have a light hand, but wanted to bring those two things up as well. So that's kind of a brief introduction of where we're at.
All right, I think that there's some good points raised. You know, as we think about what the resident is saying when it comes to a bed and breakfast in an Airbnb, as to whether those should be the same or not. And I guess my first thought, it feels like, to me, like it crosses a little bit of line, although I've not thought about it.
Will you repeat the question or the problem statement?
Yeah, so the question, I think it's kind of two. I'll go with the first one.
This is related to that.
Yeah. So her question was, bed and breakfast lodging, is it a short-term rental considered a bed and breakfast lodging? If not, what's the difference stated between it? That's the essential question.
So Spencer, bed and breakfast is not permitted under the current proposal.
Yeah, so bed and breakfast is, and this is our current code. So this is code bed and breakfast. This was written and that table was put in there a long time ago. So, I mean, that's been before the proliferation of websites and apps that you can rent online with. So it was more of a traditional bed and breakfast when that was written in. I think the one thing we do have in our code, and maybe we need to clarify it, is it's in our home-based business code. So a traditional bed and breakfast that you think of with 8 different rooms, an owner that's off-site or a business that owns it wouldn't be eligible for a home-based business license per our home-based business code. But I mean, it's maybe not as clearly spelled out as it could be. So that's kind of what we have. That's the main thing. And there's no breakfast element also, but I don't know how important that is. Yeah, I don't know how much of that's a name or how much of that is just picking at words, but short-term rentals doesn't necessarily have a breakfast aspect. We could also take out bed and breakfast and replace it with short-term rentals and adjust it, or however we feel those overlap, I guess.
So currently, bed and breakfasts are not allowed in residential.
They're not allowed in any single-family residential zone.
Okay. But short-term rentals are. So then the question is does that bed and breakfast fall under the short-term rental?
Yeah, kind of flipped.
So we've kind of got 2 different rules, and it depends on what you call it.
Yep.
So if I rent out my house to whatever website, that's fine under the short-term rental. But if I use the term bed and breakfast, then it's not fine. Although the 2 really could almost be the same thing.
Yep, and that's the problem we have. And it's not an uncommon problem. to be honest, around the state. I think everybody's been caught a little bit off guard, and it gets a little bit muddy just because there are certain rights to rent out your property that the city can't legislate. We can't. So we couldn't tell anybody that they can't sublet their property. So we also, in any of our code, and that's kind of what the attorney has been helping us do when we craft this. So
is a distinguishing thing then, a bed and breakfast would be a commercial enterprise.
right.
And would have to have a business license.
Correct. Yep.
And if they're going to serve a meal, they'd also have to come under the health department.
Yeah, that could play into it as well. I'm not sure the details on that, but
Spencer, when you say it's not allowed in the code, the bed and breakfast, is it explicitly listed as not allowed, or is it code simply silent on the issue?
yeah, no. So it's the bed and breakfast lodging is specifically listed in our use table, and it's permitted in several mixed use zones and conditional in a couple, but it's not in any single family zones.
Would it be helpful to just insert excludes bed and breakfast lodging? Or?
Yeah, maybe. We don't have a good definition of it either, so we could look at that also.
As you look around the states, Spencer, have there been other cities where you've seen them say, okay, we've gone through and we've worked on addressing this, proactively, I guess actively doing something with these zones? Or are you aware of any cities that have been through that process already, or is everybody kind of in the same boat right now and they're all just reacting to it?
Many cities don't have code on it right now. I would say the majority don't have code. The few cities that do, they're primarily cities where it's a significant issue. So Moab, for example, they do restrict it. You can't have it in certain zones. Sandy is one of the ones that maybe isn't necessarily a destination city, but still has code on the matter, and they're surprisingly pretty strict. But I don't think they restrict areas of the city. I'd have to go back and verify that. But from my memory, I don't think they restrict it by zone. It's just there's a fairly lengthy registration process, and they have to have a sign and different things as part of it.
Well, I only stayed in a few bed and breakfasts, maybe two in our last time, but they have been in homes.
Mm-hmm.
Been in a home and the kitchen area, ate in the dining area, bedrooms, et cetera, so forth. But I think anything we can do to help clarify and make that distinction would certainly be helpful in the long run.
One thing we could do is take this bed and breakfast listing and change it. We'd have to come in and have a public hearing. We couldn't do it tonight, but change it to that short-term rental line and just have it fall in line with our current ordinance that basically states you've got to register, have a home-based business. We'd have to change the zones that it could be in, and it would. Because you're right, bed and breakfasts are in homes, and the probability, I haven't had anybody ask me about a traditional bed and breakfast. I'm not saying it will never happen. It could. I could have somebody come in and ask, but the majority of people that are going to register with this, keeping in mind it's still a pretty low number, about 15 or so properties that I saw when I looked up on the sites, are going to be short-term rentals through a website or an app type of thing, not so much a traditional one. But that's one solution, is we could remove bed and breakfasts and add short-term rentals, or we could clarify bed and breakfasts and leave a place for a traditional bed and breakfast somewhere else in the city, or there's a couple different ways. Or we can just have a definition and say they're different and pass it on to city council, but it does seem a little bit confusing as is.
I
still on my mind, I'm trying to sort out. Got homeowner, homeowner property rights, we've got neighbors and impact it has on them. And that's where it seems like, in other areas, you say, okay, here's kind of a division line. And that's where the zoning should make a difference. And on this one, it feels muddy to me. I'm trying to sort that out in my mind. And I don't know that I've come to a spot where I feel like, yeah, I've got at least the rationale for doing one thing or the other. I don't know if anybody else here. Does the number of rooms or rentals make a difference for that? That's what I'm the same way. I'm trying to distinguish where's the line cross that we start to have things that might impact a neighbor or concerns with that. And so that's one area that I was like, well, does it become more than one rental or?
A couple of
I'm
things,
just thinking out loud.
a couple of things to keep in mind. When this was developed on the municipal code, it was in the 80s and 90s when they developed a lot of municipal code for several cities. I mean, there's no such thing as Airbnb or a short-term rental. It wasn't an option or even something that people did back in the day. And so that's why they developed the code that specifies no bed and breakfast, which fell under a certain category. And I don't know if there is a definition of what is a bed and breakfast, but it was kind of, you envision something in your mind, like yes, bed and breakfast.
Right.
Up front.
Like
It's a
sign out front.
Yep. And so that fell under that definition. And there were few and far between.
Yeah.
When those things happen.
But I always envision that as a commercial enterprise.
Right.
Correct. The problem
More like a hotel.
now, though,
No, yeah.
is people have a constitutional right based off of the state ombudsman to rent out either a portion or all of their property, their home. The cities can't restrict that. There's no way you can restrict those two things, to rent out a portion or all of their home, as long as they don't exceed the definition of a family, number of people in the home, the nuisance ordinances. And so the short-term rental is kind of a reactionary thing,
Yeah.
where you're basically saying, okay, this is going to happen. There's not much we can do about it other than restrict certain types of things related to nuisances, related to the family, a number of people in the home. But other than that, you're just trying to say, if this is going to happen, in sort of a limited capacity in North Logan, how do you make it safe? How do you make it easy for them to come in and get an inspection, have it up and running, and not be a nuisance to the neighbors around them? So that's your balance that you're trying to do at that point.
So in our short-term rental guidelines, or whatever we're calling them, we've left that pretty general. And so where does that line, where do we cross the line where that becomes something that we need to protect the neighborhood or protect the property of others? Where is that line? Is it automobiles? Is it, the number of people coming in and out? Is the time they're coming in and out? So that's where I think you have to look. Because, my reactionary thing is just pull Airbnb out or bed and breakfast, because I think that kind of, but somewhere there's a line that, if all of a sudden, in my neighborhood, they're renting out 8 rooms, and there's 16 cars parked out there every morning, that becomes that where I would be concerned.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think that, I think there definitely is a line, and I think it probably is. I mean, I think of a bed and breakfast, I think it's functions more like a hotel.
Yeah.
An Airbnb that's low impact will function more of a, you have a lot of people come stay at your house. I mean, if you have a lot of family come over occasionally, that's the same thing. And it's occasional, it's not as frequent, it's kind of a side thing, and not full-time hotel type of situation. So, and maybe it is the number of people that can come in at a time.
Yeah.
And yeah,
I could have a, under the short-term rental, I could put a Danish out and a plate and call it breakfast,
mhm.
and technically meet what, I've experienced in bed and breakfasts. And so then I think it is, you have to look to now, what is it now the volume of people or the size or cars or whatever?
And I think we left the short-term thing fairly general.
The short term, we said anything less than a 30-day period. And the attorney,
So from a time period.
right, time
But
period.
as far as like
yeah.
cars and rooms, I think, didn't we kind of steer away from?
The thing that got vague and the thing that the attorney kind of got leery on was the you can have 2 people per room. And that one was tough because he's like, I don't know if that's going to hold up. What we have is basically they have to, in their application, list the maximum of number of persons the short-term rental will accommodate. So the kind of the hole we have is they decide and tell us how many people will fit in there, and then we hold them to that. The thing for that is if they say, so if they say, well, I'm just going to give a huge number, and then I'm covered. So they say 20, we do have a parking requirement. And last time we discussed increasing the number of spaces per people. So if they say 20, they're going to have to add another 1 space for every 3 people over 6. So that's going to be 4 more spaces in addition to the 2. And they may not have that. They might not have 6 spaces. So that's kind of our logic.
Let's look the other way. Is there another thing that a commercial, what we typically view as a bed and breakfast, may fall under? So is there hotels or something like that where we could specify, falls under its own, a commercial hotel, or I don't know, commercial lodging, or something like that, where that can be. So you push it the other way and just leave the short-term rental as the short.
Yeah,
I don't see North Logan as, I don't think we're going to deal with traditional bed and breakfasts. But I don't see that as a big thing here. But does it fall under something else?
Yeah, we do have a hotel motel line that could fall under. And I'm not sure if we have that defined.
What's the CC?
CC is community commercial, I believe. We don't have very much of that. CG is our general commercial. So the hotel motel is permitted in our general commercial and our community commercial. It's conditional in our industrial.
Other bed and breakfast, we have C and C.
Oh, these ones. Yeah, that just means it's a conditional use.
Oh, okay.
So, and that's in our mixed use zone.
That is a difference between the hotel and the bed and breakfast.
Yeah, as it stands, and what the rhyme or reason on that is, I'm not entirely sure, to be honest. But that's the way it.
So does it make
was.
sense to say hotel or motel and include commercial bed and breakfast lodging?
Yeah, let me take a look at the definitions and see if we have one. We don't have one for bed and breakfast, but see if we have one for hotel. Hotel or motel. It's right here. Any building which is designed to cater to transient occupancy, offering temporary rooms which are used, rented, hired out. To be classified as a hotel or motel, it must have at least 6 guest rooms and shall furnish services such as linens, maids, and furnishings. So I mean, we could go in and add to this definition traditional bed and breakfast over X amount of rooms with breakfast services is included in this. If we like, that wording was really bad. We'd have to put some thought into how to include it, but
just remove it, and
right.
it falls under the short term, and it's got to meet those things that we're trying to protect anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And then we just eliminate the need for.
The only question would come up under certain business licensing, for the true bed and breakfast, they would have to pay transient room tax. So they fall under a hotel motel where they would have to pay an additional tax if they were truly under that.
But isn't our Airbnbs, isn't that the push for?
I think they're pushed for, but right now, they don't pay a transient room tax, they just pay their business license fees.
I think they do in some
They
cities.
do?
Mhm.
Okay.
With some of these ordinances, they do. That's not
we
something.
want to address and probably.
So if you want to be progressive with that, then you dump this in the hotel category.
Yeah.
Where it would include all of those other commercial things that you're trying to acquire, taxes and the fire code inspections and all of those sorts of things. things, and then it's there.
We'll probably want to look at that because if other cities, the majority of them that have an ordinance are charging them, and they're probably supposed to be collected
It
based
should be
off the state
collected.
code,
Yeah.
and they probably need to be remitted back to the city. We only receive a portion of it, but they need to be remitted back to the city.
Would you include short-term rentals under the categories, different categories? That become a separate.
That's something we could do is add short-term rental. Maybe if we remove bed and breakfast, we could add short-term rentals to and have it be its own separate category in there and just list it in the residential type zones. That could be something we do, yes.
Or just add it so that bed and breakfasts are included, that also are short-term rental.
We could do that as well.
Would help give a little bit of
If we did that, it'd probably be good to add a definition for bed and breakfast, and we would want to find the line that kind of Jeff is hinting at. I don't know if it's number of rooms. I don't know if it's professional services. I don't know what that line is, but we'd want to find it and add a definition for bed and breakfast so that they're distinguished. The one thing about this code and where we put it, it is in our home-based business license section. So basically that states that the use of a residence for a home-based business should be clearly and obviously subordinate to the main purpose of the property as a residence. So that's maybe one thing that helps in short-term rentals, just where it is. If a business came in and that was the sole purpose of the property, say they bought a nice property with a ranch and wanted to have it as a commercial enterprise for people to come stay on a ranch because it's a nice rustic setting, and that's the sole purpose, and it's more for that than for a residence, then it wouldn't necessarily fit with a home-based business license, and then it would fit as a bed and breakfast. So that could be what we kind of lean on. The problem is it's a bit vague. So I'd want to check with Seth to see if he thinks that would hold up. And anytime it's not specific, I mean, we set ourselves up for something that walks the line and is difficult in the future, but maybe there's a good way to define it. I'm not sure.
How does Logan define it?
I haven't,
So the anniversary inn, I don't know what the zoning is there, but there's homes around it.
I haven't seen,
There is.
yeah, I haven't seen anything on
I
Logan.
think they run it and offer this.
Yeah.
I actually have their zoning map for another discussion further on, but I believe that's on Center Street, isn't it? So I think that's second, first, this one's Center. So it's right there. It looks like it's maybe in that purple, right? That pink purple. Let's see. Town Center. So yeah, Town Center is a commercial zone. So they're in the commercial zone. I don't remember seeing a short-term rental ordinance. Yeah, I don't remember seeing one. I think the primary focus for the city and what we get out of it, we don't have the significant problems that other cities have. But this is a simple ordinance that basically lets us know who has one. So it has them register, and then it has some grounds in there that if there's violations, we can say, hey, get your act together, we have this code. If there's repeat violations, we could revoke a business license or something. So we could handle a nuisance if it comes up. It's almost like a little protection in that regard, but it's not necessarily a tremendous problem.
Basically, like, sort of get on that line, what are those defining characteristics you'd like to get? And maybe that's from what I understand in some of the places have done, or, you know, put something like this together. But right now, the way everything is written, it's really contradiction. So something needs to change in the code the way it's written. What exactly that is, that's what I'm trying to figure out. What are those criteria? Like I say, focus on it, or the nature of the transaction that's going on.
And I'm wondering if any of those other city codes have got something in there that provides, some of that direction or defining lines,
I see it as, it's either a hotel or it's a short-term rental. I don't see it as its own thing. That it falls under that commercial enterprise and you define it how we define it. Or it falls under the short-term rental, which we have the protections and things in place there.
Yeah.
Spencer, the fact that somebody advertises their home for short-term rental purposes, and they advertise it on a website that has B&B in their name, like Airbnb, that doesn't define it as a bed and breakfast. It still is somebody's house that they're just renting out once in a while to earn a little bit of extra money. So the fact that it's advertised on one of these websites, I need you to answer if this is right, does not define whether or not it's a B&B. It's a B&B or bed and breakfast if they're operating like that. If it's a commercial enterprise that is set up solely for the purpose of generating income in a lodging type of setting.
Yeah.
Rather than an individual's house that every once in a while they want to rent out for a while to somebody, right?
Right. I agree with that. And I think finding a good way to illustrate that line that Jeff has talked about and that Eric has talked about, I think is very important. And having some good language that defines how it's different than a commercial enterprise. And I'm probably going to have to spend some time
I noticed that Eric received a letter from a concerned citizen that because a certain property was advertised on Airbnb, therefore it was a bed and breakfast, and therefore it's not allowed. But that's not necessarily true. You could advertise your motorcycle for sale on an Airbnb if you wanted to, I guess, but it doesn't make it an Airbnb.
It's a little bit more, it's a little bit more fishy than that because there's a number of state legislators that own Airbnbs. So they put code in the state code regarding short-term rentals that says that the advertisement of a short-term rental can't be used as proof that they are operating a short-term rental. I don't know how that works, but that is the direct language. Like if it's on a site,
Okay.
you can reserve it. That still is not proof that they're operating an Airbnb. And it was kind of their way to say, hey, we're going to just do this regardless. And so that's why cities are kind of reacting the way that we are. But that doesn't change the definition of what it is, where you cross the line between a bed and breakfast and a short-term rental. Like, keep in mind that the advertisement of either one is not. It just basically they threw that out as a way to prove it that someone's operating an Airbnb.
So for the purposes of this discussion or any future modification, are the terms short-term rental and bed and breakfast, are they legal terms that if they're uttered or written down, it automatically places you in a certain category and different restrictions and requirements?
For our code purposes, that just is if they have a definition in our code or not. As far as the broader legal term, I'm not sure. We do have a definition for short-term rental in this ordinance. As far as I could find, we don't have bed and breakfast defined. So as far as our code goes, it's not a defined term that we can reference that shows what it is. And I think that's something we need to probably address.
Maybe if you don't already have this, maybe a comprehensive definition for the purposes of this act, if short-term rental could be tied down as to what that means and what it does not mean. And don't try to include or exclude any other names. This is just a function. And if you fit under this function, it's allowed. But if you don't fit under this function, it's not allowed.
I think we have that in the short-term rental.
We have it defined. Yeah, we have it defined as for the short-term rental. We don't have, I think it's the bed and breakfast part. So with that not having a definition, it's hard to say if that short-term rental is a bed and breakfast or if bed and breakfast is more like a hotel, but it's different than a hotel because they're different uses. So I think either removing bed and breakfast and just having that be included as a hotel, like Jeff has said, and then having short-term rentals and hotel motels, that may be the most clear. I mean, we don't, typical bed and breakfast isn't a model we see very often anymore, which isn't to say there won't be anymore, but it's not common anymore.
It seems like if we, since we already have the definition of hotel motel, we could, and it's specified 6 rooms or more. To use the same definition for a bed and breakfast, except be 5 or less, or 4 or less, or something like that. And whether they chose to use commercial laundry facilities or do it themselves, that shouldn't matter to us, but at least it would give a restriction on the number of beds and would provide a distinction between bed and breakfast and hotel motel.
Yeah, it does get a bit tricky if we just go by rooms. That's a clean line. Like that's a great line to draw because it's easy to say yes, no to. But it comes back to kind of what Alan stated. And there are some houses that maybe 12, 13 rooms. It could be a big house up on the bench that they go away for a weekend and they rent out their house and people stay there for 2 nights. And they may have 12 rooms. If we limit and say you can't rent it out because you have more rooms, I'm not sure where that gets us legally, if that gets us into murky waters.
I've stayed in commercial bed and breakfasts that are, 2 rooms. So I don't know what that buys us to come up with a third definition. That it's either a short-term rental and it abides by those things, or it's a commercial enterprise that falls under a hotel, motel, or inn, or whatever the term is.
Mhm.
I don't know where the 6-room thing comes from on a hotel motel.
I don't either.
So
Honestly.
that's, maybe that's, I've stayed in inns, that don't use the term bed and breakfast or hotel. They use the term inn. I don't know. I think I just gotta keep it general. Either falls in short-term or falls in commercial hotel inn.
And then to me from there is what delineates those 2, what differentiates them?
So is that a general consensus is the way to go forward? Basically, what would change would be bed and breakfast would be removed from the table. The definition of hotel motel would be expanded slightly to include a traditional bed and breakfast. If needed, I could look at that language. The short-term rental ordinance, one of the 2 of those definitions would be clarified to kind of define that line a little bit better. With it, the main thing I'm getting is commercial enterprise. So however I need to, and I might need to look at some other examples to figure out verbiage or something we can lean on for that, but one's a commercial enterprise, one's not, and we'd have hotel motel in our use table and short-term rental in our use table. Bed and breakfast is gone.
Right. And I think I love that. Yeah, I like that. And as part of that sketch, I think you pointed out, 8-501, where you're looking at what's going on in those residential areas, because it says, the primary purpose of this is to be a home. Right? And these other things are subjugated, they're secondary. Otherwise, it feels like we're bringing the commercial side of things into the residential.
Don't we already have a problem with the fact that we do have a business or an entity within the city that is advertising themselves as a bed and breakfast?
I don't know, and I don't think I got the email or the letter that's been referred to a couple times. I maybe had separate conversations, but I think we have. I don't know of any that are advertising as like a traditional bed and breakfast, but I do know we have some that are on short-term rental websites. Like Alan stated, though, with state code, them being on those websites doesn't necessarily mean as a city that we can. This is proof that they rent it out. So really, it's just for estimating purposes that I look on there.
They're just advertising on Airbnb. I don't think they're advertising as a bed and breakfast.
Is there a title though? Isn't it, what's the name of it? I looked it up too, and I can't remember what the name was.
Oh, everybody that does that and names their thing, that doesn't mean it's a commercial. I've got friends that have some rentals in southern Utah, and they name that something. It's a condo that, you know, we go stay out as a family. So it isn't, you know, that doesn't change that. To me, that falls under that short term. You know, when I see the traditional B&B, I'm cruising down the country road and see this sign, and, you know, they've got 3 or 4 rooms in this, you know, Victorian home, they serve breakfast, that sort of thing. But the ones that you see, you know, and I didn't go look at this one that's here on 2700, but yeah, that's very common that people name their place. You know, this particular one, it would be interesting to see what we do in our conditional use permits. You know, if that's a concern, because that one's operating under a conditional use permit, I believe, the ADU. It's not.
Is it, Spencer, is that one operating under a conditional use permit?
This one, I think I went back through my emails and I just saw that I do have that email. I must have missed it.
It's an ADU.
Yeah. So that one does have a conditional use permit, I believe. And again, yeah, I'm not sure.
Right.
The subject of the email is this distinction between a short-term rental and our bed and breakfast lodging that we have stated here. So we acknowledge and agree with the confusion that's in the email. That's what this discussion is about. And so, and I don't know if that's what brought this to your attention.
Yeah, it was this one and a different one. I had missed this one. I had seen a different one, but yeah, no, this is the same person I've been talking to.
Yeah, so I mean, yeah, there's a little bit of cleanup here, but yes, we have this in here. What are we going to change with the ordinance?
So are we going to make some adjustments and then take a look at it again in a few weeks?
Look right here, I think the one that says that typing.
Yeah.
To me, I think that's what I'm seeing as our path forward. But it needs to be changed. It's not where it should be right now.
And with these changes, with them including the use table, we will need a public hearing as well. We didn't need one before because it was all in Title 8. This one would be into Title 12. So I can make these changes. Would you want to have a public hearing like next meeting, or would you rather see a round in the interim before you had a public hearing? I'm okay with either way.
I would prefer to see it before public hearing.
Okay.
I feel like we got it done that way.
Okay.
I would like to understand this though. Okay, so this is an ADU. So it's allowed to have people live in it with a conditional use permit.
Correct.
But is there anything in the conditional use permit that states what they can or can't? I understand the state, you know, we can't tell somebody what they can and can't do at their house, but this isn't their house. This is an ADU that's under a conditional use permit. That's what we probably need to look at.
Part of Jeff, with this one, if I got my timing correct, it came through, it was large.
Yeah.
And that ended up being our discussion, they're trying ADU size.
Yeah.
In part because of that.
Yes, that's 100% correct.
And the problem we ran into with it as well, just to address that specific question, when we first went through that ADU code, like it triggered this one property triggered that. Uh-huh. Our first iteration had a stipulation in there, and it was accepted pretty much by all planning commissioners that you couldn't rent it out for less than 30 days, which according to our short-term rental code, the ordinance we're looking at now is, I mean, that's basically what it is. So we tried to add that you couldn't have the ADU be a short-term rental. Our attorney looked at that and scratched it immediately with some strong language that said you can't do this per state code. So I don't,
Even though it's under a conditional use.
yeah, and I can,
tried to sneak that in there.
Yeah.
Not sneak, but I tried to put that in there.
Because I see that as different than your residence.
yeah, I'm
It's
not,
one thing to say, yeah, if I need to rent out my family room to pay the bills, you know, and you can't tell somebody what they can and can't do with that, I get that. But when someone has a conditional use permit for an ADU, that to me, we've stepped into a whole different lane.
right, yeah, and I'm not sure, I can get some clarity. We're gonna wanna make sure we're working hand in hand with Seth on this one. So I can ask him and see if there's any difference there. But yeah, when we sent it to him the first time, he crossed that out in red pretty quick. That was one of his first comments.
I think you should be able to do this. I was in the same feeling as you. There's conditions that have to be met.
Because I would be apt to not give a conditional use permit in.
Yeah, that's the tough part. And conditional use
Well-
permits are tough as is.
Yeah. Because this introduces all sorts of stuff that we're playing by a different set of rules now. You know, so obviously a neighbor's poking at everything. So, you know, I think we have to be careful with that it's not the primary residence. And we have issued a conditional use permit to, you know, let somebody live in this accessory dwelling, but now I'm gonna operate it as a short-term rental.
Yeah, I can ask for some clarity on that, just to double check with him. Sometimes it's good to go over, I can just give him a call and talk briefly about it and get that answered.
Yeah, I was just curious about.
I think we all agree, and anyone with common sense would agree on that principle, including the neighbors, but it's just whatever we can do legally. I don't think we pushed Seth on it, but Seth quickly crossed that out. He took that language right out.
Even though it's under conditional use.
Mhm.
Because we follow strict rules on other conditional uses.
Mhm.
Okay, so ADUs for everybody.
So given what's written down there, talking about trying to determine what those lines are, commercial versus something that's home use. You get it that path forward, any other feedback, anything else you want to include in there?
I think that makes it simple and eliminates the set confusion.
Mhm.
That meets our intent.
Yeah.
And it'll address the issue that's been brought up. So, Spencer, that's good. You're right.
Great.
Move forward with that.
Yep, that's great.
All right. We'll wrap up agenda item 1. Let's move on to number 2. Discussion of landscape and site development requirements for parcels located adjacent to 2500 North and appropriate zoning for the area. Spencer, take it away.
Okay, so this one is going to be a much shorter one. We talked about this several times, and we wanted to wrap this into like a zoning question. This code change could be as simple as this that I have shown here, and just take our Main Street code that we have and just say, and also 2500 North from the US 91 intersection west to the North Logan City boundary. And then that just loops that 2500 North into that same code, and it's easy. Right now, with it being industrial, it is under that street tree requirement that we have, that we recently passed also, at least for portions of it. The other question mark that may be a little less easy, maybe not, it seemed like people were in agreement. As far as zoning goes, I think we've heard a couple times, but I just wanted to get a definitive kind of direction from the Planning Commission. Do we want to proceed in looking at changing this zoning here and this zoning here on the north and south sides of 2500 to be commercial, kind of in anticipation of that becoming a gateway into the city? So there's 2 separate questions. One's the site development, one's kind of zoning discussion that we wanted to bring up.
How far does North Logan go out west?
We go to the railroad tracks at most parts of the city, or just about there. So we stop right here before 600 West.
case of it, since we're trying to make that a desirable, visually, in terms of how it looks, and our Main Street. Now, if we do that, those measures, because you talked about two questions,
Mhm.
does that require changing that mixed commercial, that zone plan? No?
Nope, we could do the ordinance change without changing the zone. I just figure I'd open that. So those two questions can be separate. The one thing that I can see maybe being a challenge right now, and it's kind of up to this council and planning commission to determine how much of a challenge that is. The existing businesses, they obviously wouldn't be impacted by any of these code changes or the zoning. They can exist as is indefinitely. If they want to go another 200 years, they're welcome to do so. If they make any modifications and there's a landscape requirement that's different, so if they make a significant addition, say storage unit adds a bunch more units, or a new building comes in here, they would have to up the landscape requirement, which would turn potentially a little addition that they're adding to their business that's existing into something that's a lot more cost prohibitive. I don't know how much we're concerned about that or not. That's the only kind of question mark I see. I'm not particularly worried about, say, parcels that are open like this one, because it's not asking much more than what we already require, just kind of rearranging things primarily. It's more of the existing properties that they add on type of thing. That's the only really setback I could see.
Spencer, does the city have any responsibility to provide these landscaping improvements, even at like a minimum level, like a parking strip with trees? Or does the city not bear any responsibility?
Cost-wise to install, the city does not bear any responsibility when done with
You
development.
mean, well, I don't mean, maybe I'm not being specific enough. I guess I mean, I don't think right now there's not a legal requirement that the city is required to provide so much landscaping. Would that be correct?
Right,
And there's probably not a budget assigned to it either.
right.
But what if the city voluntarily did something like that to be a partner in the businesses and to inspire the businesses, and then maybe as a minimum level that other businesses that are grandfathered in are not required to do unless there's an addition or change of ownership. So in order to achieve what we're all looking for, it may not be realized for decades because of these existing properties that are already there. You would have a little patchwork, a little tree and grass here, a little tree and grass here. So what if the city decided to, I realize it's not in our purview to tell the city council what we want them to do, but if we could communicate this with the city council, that perhaps there is some benefit to the city being proactive in taking care of its own house.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And we're actually looking at that with the things got put a little bit on hold with coronavirus and trying not to meet in person as much. But look, our next step as the Main Street Committee is trying to find grants and different things to start filling the gaps. And we'd focus on, right now we've looked at Main Street, we want to look at 2500 North. But I think that's a step past this ordinance that deals just with new development that comes in, kind of looking at the ones that are grandfathered and how the city can work with them and maybe some grants. And maybe it's a partnership where we chip in X amount and we have a grant and the business chips in a little bit and trying to hit those areas so it's not a patchwork for forever. I think we definitely want to get there and get to that point where we're trying to fill in the gaps because a lot of these places aren't going to be redeveloped for a lot of years potentially, like you stated. So they could stay gaps for a long time if we don't do anything.
Is there a certain amount of right of way that the city owns that that is beyond the road that would appear to encroach on the property but does not, for purposes of if the city decided to landscape this on their own? Or are you saying that the only solution would be to encourage them with and help them with grants to do this on their own property? The city owns no property then along other than beyond the concrete edge, the actual physical curb, unlike in the residential area where we have the landscape and tree parking strip on 25th North in this area west of Main Street. I'm not aware of sidewalks or what I would traditionally understand to be a parking strip that could be used if the city decided to take this task on themselves. Is that correct?
Yeah, so there is a sidewalk that's right on the back of curb, but you're correct in stating we don't have additional land, and we actually don't own the right of way here either. This is a UDOT road. West of Main Street it's UDOT and Main Street is UDOT. So we would have to work with the property owners in this case.
So the best solution to realize what our hopes of turning this into if nothing else, a secondary gateway into the city and make it appealing and nice looking would be, the goal is to have continuity, get this thing in and have everyone contribute. And I think you mentioned this, I just want to understand a little bit better myself. The clear path. Obviously, there's people that will have to do it. They'll pull a trigger and they'll have to do it because of the legislation that we have. But to encourage people to do it on their own nickel could be tough. And so the city will be active in pursuing grants to assist them in that purpose. Is that right?
Yeah, I think we definitely will need to be to make sure it's continuous. When new property comes in, then they would do it. I mean, with certain, there may be certain cases with different properties and where they are. They may be in a URA or a CRA, basically a tax increment zone. And one of the ways they could use that tax increment funding is to the city could help out by installing some different things. So in a couple cases, if they're in one of those zones that are established or could be established, we could include that as part of it. We're actually looking at a new redevelopment type zone now, the economic development department is. So, and that's one of the things that we've thought about is potentially looking at helping with some of these improvements to make it look nice. And that way it's just looped in with RDA. That's a benefit for the whole community. So in some cases, we could definitely come in as new development goes in. And that's really what this ordinance pertains to. And it's kind of the first step. And we did it for Main Street, and we're hopefully going to do it for 2500 North. I think they've got sidewalk all the way down. It's right up against the street, so it's not particularly comfortable. But maybe that's something we'd want to do to change. I don't know how much we'd want to change it or not, but the landscape standards would still apply.
If we're applying Main Street standards, 2500 North, then that will change.
Right.
Because the sidewalk now has to meander. There's some requirements to go along.
Right. So we
That's already built in.
And and you mentioned that's UDOT, that would be UDOT ownership, but they probably have a right of way that goes well beyond the sidewalk. Do you know that?
They might. What they show on the county viewer is not always accurate, so I'm not entirely sure if it's right or not, but they may have more than it shows. It shows that they're just right at the back of either the curb or the sidewalk. So we could look, and instead of just adding, this is exactly like Main Street, we could change it a little bit so they don't have to replace a sidewalk that's already there. That could be a change to this. It would be a little more code writing, but doable.
this, I look at this and say, are we trying to make 2500 North look like Main Street? And if we are, then I don't see why.
Your ultimate goal is to have it look like what we want Main Street to look like. Our current Main Street is pretty bad as far as standards go for sidewalk. We all know this. We want it to look like the new standards that we've implemented. That's the question I'm writing. You can measure it right there, so it'll be fairly accurate. It's gonna probably be a 99 foot if you measure it.
Yeah, it's around there. This line looks like it's a little bit off from the sidewalk, but it's right around 99. So, yeah. Yeah, we could keep it the same as Main Street and have it go to that. We could adjust it and have it be something a little different either way. But depends what we want in the future, really.
What my thoughts is that it would make sense to me to make it the same as Main Street. I think there are some good design things in there. And that's a main thoroughfare coming into the city. So, thoughts on that? I'm saying that it's not, yes.
I agree.
I agree.
One thing I could do too, just to verify with UDOT, so we're working with them, the sidewalk looks like it's in their right of way. So if we're gonna have them change that sidewalk, I can reach out to the planner, the region planner with UDOT, just to verify that. And that gives us, just so we're collaborating with him on this, with it being UDOT right of way, that may be helpful, but yeah.
Yeah, please do that.
Okay. And then as far as zoning goes, just before we move on, what's the appetite planning commission to make that change? Obviously, that's not something we're prepared to do right now. We'd want to talk to all these business owners, or at least have, and we definitely want to have public hearings and kind of figure out, make sure we're solid before we change it. But is that something we want to pursue or not? Kind of an entry level.
Why would we want to?
Why do we want to change the zoning?
Yeah.
So it's basically just a different business types. So it would be a longer term change because most of the things are that are developed. But it would make it so there's general commercial there, which has different businesses in than our manufacturing heavy commercial, restaurants and different things like that, kind of anticipating the gateway sort of aspect, or that being more of a gateway.
Does Wendy's call the city and say, we put a Wendy's on 2500 North? I mean, is this a common thing?
So
And you would say, oh, absolutely not, or yeah, I think that could be considered. Let's send it to the client.
If it's zone, you're kind of just being proactive at that point. So Wendy's wouldn't call if it's an industrial zone, they just wouldn't come in there.
Right.
But if it's general commercial, they'd say, hey, I see we've got.
But they are looking at it and saying, so if it's industrial, they're just now, we're on.
Yeah, they're saying it doesn't fit with what we're trying to do.
This is, if we go commercial general, does someone's come in and say, yeah, I can't put warehouses there, so I'm not going to put my business there?
That's a component of it. Keep in mind that half of those businesses there, about half of them would be compliant with general commercial right now.
Right.
So
So that's why I'm trying to understand what are we losing right now by having it zoned what it is?
it's more just the fear of long-term. If you go into it, and you have a bunch of manufacturing, you can't get things like hotels, restaurants, and the gateway aspect coming in. You will have industrial, you will have businesses. Some of them attractive, some of them that don't really fit the true mold of industrial, but some of them could. And then you can't attract those types of businesses.
So, but they're looking at that. They're not driving by and saying, yeah, I can see the Holiday Inn here or Wendy's here.
Yeah.
They're pulling this up and they're saying, oh, it's mixed commercial,
Yes.
so I'm not going there.
The real estate and everything else, they look at that and they say it just doesn't fit with what we were trying to put in there.
Are you looking at all or nothing there? In other words, is the,
In the past, the city council has just said, you don't really want a spot zone, so you don't want to put little chunks. You want to do a solid line, kind of like where Spencer's drawing. So you wouldn't want to go back extremely far, but you'd want to go back at least 100 or 200 feet in each direction to create that frontage.
That's what I was wondering. So you're looking at 2,500 north, you would come back to maybe 2,400
Yeah.
west and up to 2,600 west or something.
Yeah.
Get a straight, nice little frontage area there, more multiple use versus
Correct.
leave the rest of it as the multiple use commercial.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think,
Still could include like a light, correct me if I'm wrong, Spencer, a light manufacturing or a light industrial.
Yeah.
Or a high-tech manufacturing could still fit in that zone.
yeah, light,
Frontage requirement.
light industrial is, I think the main thing that you'd kind of, the one reason you do this is if something came into one of these empty lots, right now with it being industrial, it could be a heavy manufacturing, it could be it could be one of those uses. And once it comes in and it's a brand new building, then it's there for longer. And that is what we have down there. So if that's what we want to keep and just have the frontage be a little nicer, that's a decision. If we want the businesses that come in to be different, and this is a long-term decision, really. If we made the decision now, we wouldn't see any impact in that until buildings start getting built slowly over time. And it'd be a 20, 30 year as businesses or buildings start to phase out, the buildings get old, people move, buildings get redeveloped. That's when you'd see it start coming together. So it'd be a long time frame if we did change it.
What generates the most revenue for the city with the least amount of cost to the citizens of the city?
Alan's the best one for that one, I think.
That's a loaded question, but in general, just a simple answer to that is general commercial. So general commercial requires the least amount of services other than roads. But some general commercial can require a lot of water, but in general, they don't. They don't require a lot of services. And then at the same time, they generate a lot in sales tax, so the retail, and then property tax. Those are your big, high-producing areas for little service or little cost. Now, industrial can be in that same boat. However, they don't generally create sales tax. So they'll create a little bit of property tax. They don't use a lot of services. They aren't that big of a draw and wear and tear on our roads. And so there's a lower level return on industrial, but there's a low cost to the city to provide that. Think about it this way though, is I think long term, I think the bubble around this area, Logan to the west of there has a large residential zone. So it's huge out to the west, just residential around the airport, wrapping around that. The airport expansion in the future, so talking about airport 20 years from now, having commercial airlines coming in, and then having that gateway coming in, so hopefully a lot of commercial, larger stores, restaurants, hotels coming in through that area is kind of that gateway aspect. So if you're looking for a larger extent, that's why it's ideal at that point.
Yeah. No, I agree.
I guess I just have to wonder with Logan, I would not want to put my house behind the airport, quite honestly. And so I see other uses, but I just don't see residential going in around the airport. Yeah, that makes no sense.
I grew up next to the Air Force Base, so I don't know about
And again, that's a separate conversation. We could move forward with the site development requirements code without rezoning, but it goes hand in hand enough that it would be a good discussion point.
A proactive thing to do.
Well,
Because one of the things that it does bring to mind is when you change that zoning, and I don't know what the property looks like, you cut somebody's property in half, and half of it is in one zone and half is now in another.
I think you would have to follow. When you follow property lines.
Yeah, you have to follow something logical, a logical property line or something else.
Yeah, I kind of drew it at the back of these lots. To the south end, there is a back of the lot that kind of makes sense. There's a right of way here for 400 north that makes sense to have that property line along. On the north side, I mean, there are some lots that are longer. There's this one that kind of breaks in and has frontage there. You've got lots, it's not as clean. There's a line kind of here between these ones, but and all of this, you have to remember, we're looking from above ground. If you were on ground, a lot of these businesses, you don't see that. You're not going to see that line. It makes sense when you're looking at a map, but in real person, it's tough. So we would want to figure out exactly where that would go. Yeah, I think we'd have to try and find the best, most logical way. But it would split some properties, I think, no matter which way we slice it.
Increase the value of the property.
You know, I don't know the difference, general commercial and industrial. And we'd have to talk with the property owners. It depends on what they want to use it for. We have seen a decent bit of demand for industrial land. But then again, as of late, we've seen quite a few people looking for commercial land as well. I'm not sure if it's a wash there for them, industrial, commercial, to be honest.
It's a little bit higher in value, and property taxes could be slightly affected through their, long-term discussion, for them. One thing that we couldn't do, we couldn't zone it and zone someone out of business. That's not something we would do, or we could, we just wouldn't even consider it. However, if you grandfathered in and then new future businesses, new uses, would have to bring things up to code or up to date.
What's driving the demand for industrial? I mean, why are people coming here? And are we tripping on ourselves by getting rid of some of that?
It's a push right now because of I'm not an economist. However, what we're seeing is obviously the slowdown in retail sales because of Amazon sales. It's just directly due to online sales. But then we're also seeing an uptick just simply because we have a workforce and a labor force geared towards high tech. So you look at the Space Dynamics lab, 5 years ago, they were 300 employees. Now they're in excess of 1,000, what I understand. You look at other things like EP Systems, SNS, Ultra Spider Gone, Lazy One, Walt USA, the salt factory, sock factory, or a high-tech clothing factory. They're all expanding and growing. Well, until the COVID hit.
But that works in that.
Yeah.
Commercial.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the vast majority of them would still be fine to be within it. They probably have some frontage requirements they have to maintain, but most of those would fall outside of that.
I mean, that's where the future is, though.
Yeah.
I mean, we got empty buildings up and down Main Street that's general commercial, right?
Yes.
So are we cutting our hands off by saying, well, let's put more general commercial in and eliminating some of that, what I believe is the future with warehousing and.
I think as long as you leave it open to some of the light manufacturers, you're still going to hit that. You still hit that high-tech market. And some of the general commercial on Main Street, we've had interest from high-tech manufacturing coming in, which would have been allowed, the ones that we've looked at. And they could have come into those buildings. Right now, surprisingly, we're having push on several of our commercial buildings on Main Street. Though. There's some retailers coming in. You'll see that in the next 4 to 5 months.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think there are several things commercial-wise that are still doing well, and things that could do extremely well if 2500 North continues to be a gateway, even regardless of the airport, but just how many more people are coming along 10th West. And even if Logan has plans for residences and different things to the west there, which could go in, I mean, all that drives commercial. So having our commercial in the right place, I think, is important. Location's big still for commercial. And it kind of comes down to if we believe that this is enough the right place. I think if we don't think it's the right place, or if it doesn't turn into as much of a gateway, we probably would be better off having industrial there.
Expand out. I want to look at our industrial space in comparison
So that's our industrial there. It's just this rectangle. And then our commercial,
So we
Falls
have
along
a
Main.
commercial that's west of Main Street now. It is.
yep, it goes to 200.
I'm probably less inclined to think that way. I think there's a lot, I mean, how long's Kmart been empty? You got all this
Too long.
space. I don't know,
It probably won't be for much longer.
I guess the other thing, if I'm looking at this, I mean, part of the reason I think we're discussing it is the appearance of this, what does this zone look like? Right?
Mhm.
And if you're doing light commercial, I'm not seeing how that's that much different than industrial. I don't see
Mhm.
If it's industrial, heavy industrial, you run into issues of compatibility of businesses next door, or the business, the frontage doesn't have the same requirements and other things. That's when you run into problems. Because you wouldn't be able to attract other businesses at that point.
but so take EPS, it's right in the middle there. That's not heavy industrial.
It's both. It's a very high-tech,
Very
high-end,
high-tech.
professional
Yeah.
services, but they also have rooms where they have to do intensive testing on batteries.
Right.
So that they fall into kind of a true manufacturing or a true industrial portion of that, portion of the building, not all of it.
Because when you say heavy industrial, Alex, what comes to mind in cash value that fits that definition?
So heavy industrial, you can look out there. We have some businesses out there. I mean, currently in S&S, there's a meat slaughtering operation going on right now. And then you've got HA Fab, which is a steel manufacturer, which is, I mean, they're a great business, but
They're in that zone right now.
they're in that zone. But if you had a business trying to come in next door, you wouldn't have like a Wendy's or a restaurant or a hotel. You couldn't have those. They wouldn't be compatible uses. So that's the
why we
fun
have
part.
a Kmart building block.
Turn it into a food court.
I don't know. What do you want from us?
So
Opinions?
just getting a feeling to see where opinion was, to see if we want to push forward and try to get it rezoned. Sounds like the site development requirements, I'm going to go ahead with that.
I like that.
Mhm.
I think you're proactive. It fits with Main Street and those other things. I'm not feeling overly the need for rezoning.
I think if you make a change, there ought to be a reason for it, not just because. You know, something, my mind is, it's better than I see than what we have now. I'm getting the same place. I don't see that there's a clear reason to go and change.
If there's another way to accomplish it, the front and the usage, that's what we need to look into, just to make sure that's attractive. So we don't want it to be where we have kind of they didn't plan Main Street in North Logan, and UDOT didn't plan Main Street in North Logan. Even in discussions with them, they just say, well, we're like Nibley. Well, Nibley has 1 or 2 access points on the Highway 89. We have over 100 access points. So it's not the same boat, but that's how UDOT thinks about it. They just don't think about us as a commercial or industrial area. We need to look at that. And then, like I said, some uses are incompatible with other things that we would want to come into that area. It's like the meat slaughter place. No business is going to come in next to this. In the old S&S buildings, there's a meat slaughter factory right there. And that would not be compatible. Well, it is compatible with the industrial zone. Having a business come in or a hotel or something else come in next to it is just not going to happen. And so we shortchange ourselves long term by having that type of use.
Although to me, it seems like the change in the zoning is compatible with the look that we're trying to create as a gateway to North Logan. And would attract those kinds of businesses that would match that particular look that we're trying to have there for the city.
You could do even another zone is another discussion that allows for the manufacturing high tech that is a push right now. This does a more attractive front and wouldn't be incompatible with other uses coming in.
Everything that's currently there is going to be grandfathered in.
Yes.
But I don't see that much openness. We have what we have there.
You can see there's a lot of business push right now of people that are coming in to purchase these areas and probably revamp them and do something completely different with them.
Yes, you're.
I mean, you take one of the, right by the highway.
Here.
All, I mean, that's already zoned that, it's just empty. So that's available.
It's unique though. It's empty because of unique factors.
Oh, okay.
Not because of push or demand.
But I see west of that, it's already, it's loaded with buildings and facilities.
Yeah, you're talking ownership, you're talking unique owners that maybe have no reason to sell or invest in a property or something, and it just happens to be right there. That's the reason why it hasn't done, not because of push demand or other big boxes wanting to come into that area. They probably would have come into that area had we had a more eager seller in those areas.
This one. And as far as the roofs go, there are some of these buildings that are pretty new. They're not going anywhere. Like the use is pretty established. If you drive it and it's pretty fast road, it's big road, it's easy to miss. But a lot of these things are roofs. They show up, it looks developed. But when you look at the actual structure, it's not, I mean, there's not much to it, at least for some of these lots. And they could easily be torn down with a new use that may be in the cards. Not saying that they can't continue, but a lot of the structures are old and weathering and ready for redevelopment anyway. But yeah, I think having a little more clear reason before we really pursue a rezone, I think that's a good direction. Just looking to see if there really is, I mean, one is appearance, and that's to fit with kind of our gateway, but maybe even looking a little bit on the economic side, seeing if we, and I can work with UDOT too to see what their thoughts are on that road. They've offered to have kind of economic numbers or we could get traffic numbers and just kind of see if there's a compelling argument for commercial in that area being viable. It does have a lot of vehicular traffic, which is something you'd see on a commercial area. So if commercial would be viable there, maybe that's an argument for it. But I think we need to do a little more digging before we just go ahead and rezone it, is what I'm gathering from the commission.
No, I basically agree with all the comments, exception. I don't know which way to go. I think, guess I'll chime in on one thing from a development point of view and a gateway to the city point of view. I can see why Spencer and the city are leaning towards making that a commercial zone to be a little more usable for the public rather than heavy industrial. But I don't see that happening for decades because of the existing properties that are there.
All right.
Yeah.
Thanks, Spencer.
Yep.
Everybody, let's move on to agenda item 3. Discussion on commercial and residential mixed use zoning options in North Logan City.
Yep. And I before I get started into this one, I can add that both of these items are discussions. I kind of anticipated the first 2 items going a little quicker, so I added them both on. We don't necessarily, there's no time sensitive nature on these. So we could do one or both, depending on what the feeling is from the commission. But yeah, I don't know.
Let's get this one and we'll see where we land.
Okay. Great. So mixed use zoning, I'm diving in a little more in depth to the questions we had in that workshop. It seemed like we wanted to look in and get a little bit more in scale. Just for the context of this discussion, we've had quite a few conversations with developers, most since the workshop. As you all know, development is pretty high right now. We're short on applications, as you can see from our meetings, but a lot of questions, a lot of people looking at a lot of properties. And a lot of the places they're looking would be, it's a rezone question. And they're asking if they can get this area changed to generally multifamily housing is what they're looking for. In our last workshop, we talked briefly about mixed use and commercial. And it seemed like we wanted a breakdown kind of on numbers for the city, how that influences the city. I talked with Alan on that. Exact numbers are just very difficult because of where the different revenue goes and comes from. Sales tax goes, it depends on what types of businesses, goes to the state, 50% comes back, property tax goes in a different way. So it's tough to get an estimate, but we're working to see if there's a way for us to do that and get something that's going to be accurate enough and have error bars that are accurate enough to give us a clear picture. Because I mean, there's a lot of numbers between the low and the high end on that scale. So you could paint the picture any way you wanted. So that's something we want to kind of avoid. But I did look into some mixed use, and after some conversations, kind of getting an idea of what developers are looking for with a residential mixed use. And I took a look at Logan's, and the interesting thing I found, which I didn't actually know, most of their commercial zones do allow housing in there as kind of a mixed use. And most of Logan City's commercial zones allow housing in there as a mixed use. I believe it has to be on the top floors, if I remember right. Commercial mixed use, ground floor, height. I'm trying to remember where I saw that, but you can see the numbers are a lot higher than ours. Our residential units per acre maximum is 4 in our city center commercial right now. General commercial, we don't allow any. Theirs is 70. And this kind of goes hand in hand when speaking with a developer with a development style called podium. And that's really, you've got commercial on the bottom, maybe 1 or 2 floors, and then you've got 5 or 6 stories, and you've got apartments above it, which is pretty heavy residential. And keep in mind, this is just showing as an example. I'm not saying in any way that this is the right model for North Logan, but this is kind of showing what they have elsewhere. We haven't seen many developments like this in Logan, but the zoning's for it. So this is another commercial zone, their town center 2. This is where that the Anniversary Inn that we talked about earlier is in this one. 30 units per acre. And then their general, they're pretty much their equivalent of general commercial. And that one's sitting at 30 units per acre. I can flip over to their zoning. They're red. So this is Main Street. They're red, which is, it's pretty much the same kind of look as our general commercial, is their commercial zone that has 30 units per acre. And then it comes back in. This is the town center. So this is town center 2, and this is the town center 1. So that's kind of gives you an idea of what their mixed use zone is. When we talked with developers about mixed use, it seemed to be, there's kind of a threshold. You have townhomes with live work units type of mixed use, which is what we have at Four Seasons. It's actually been pretty successful. Yeah, they've been pretty successful. Or you go one step up and you have more commercial and a different commercial product, but it's more of that podium style development where you have larger buildings that are taller, that have commercial on the bottom, and more apartment units up top. And that's when you see those higher densities. And the few people we've talked to, they seem to, I mean, at first they're just trying to get it rezoned to townhomes. And from our last workshop, that didn't seem like something the Planning Commission and City Council were in favor of. So we advised them that that's not something that we see being passed. And so from there, then they switch gears and start talking about, well, we haven't seen much of it, but we could potentially see this podium style development. Is that something that you'd be interested in? Or the live work unit type of thing. The problem is we'd want to see more commercial than just a couple live work units is what we usually tell them. So I wanted to have a discussion about some more specific places. And most of these are not necessarily right on Main Street, but the city center commercial areas have been talked about over here, as more of a mixed use. Right now we have 4 units per acre. It's supposed to be primarily commercial. And we have had a couple questions on, say, some of our bigger buildings on Main Street that people are struggling to fill with a big box, and instead maybe they take down the building and have more commercial residential mix. That one's kind of faded away. We haven't heard that in a little while, but those are kind of the 2 scenarios. So I kind of wanted to get your feelings on podium style development, mixed residential, what would we want to see? Do we want to change that number that we have? And we don't have to take action necessarily. I don't know if this is something we're proactive on or if this is something we're just aware of, so that when applications come in, we work with developers on it, or if we want to change it right away. So kind of a lot of questions and more of a discussion.
First thoughts that I have is that something like that, as long as parking is accommodated in something like that, I'm certainly open to development in those types of areas. So allows for, talk about that podium style. Yeah, I would be open to that.
I'm going to reiterate a statement I made in the workshop, that I don't feel the obligation to become a metropolitan busy city area. So I'm struggling with why we feel all this pressure to provide all this multifamily housing, even with commercial in there. So that's how I feel.
Yeah, no, I think that's totally valid. And we don't have any, this is our zoning map. This is from our general plan. There's no obligation to change it. And that's something important to remember anytime a zoning amendment comes in.
I
Yeah.
think we get so caught up in growth and growth and growth, and I'm struggling with why. I mean, I love living in North Logan because of what North Logan has been. And if I wanted to live in the metro area of some city, then that's where I would choose to live. And so I struggle with why we feel this need to accommodate or bend, follow or work so hard to try and become the next metropolitan area.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, valid. The city, I mean, there are trade-offs. It's a lot of population, a lot of density. It changes character as soon as you get a lot of these. And obviously, if anybody came in and wanted to put this in the middle of a single family zone, we just tell them that's never going to pass. You can submit the application, but the meeting's going to be very short, essentially. But what we get out of it, and it's really up to the Planning Commission, City Council to determine if it's worth it or not. Like we talked about before with retail, a lot of it can tend to struggle these days. It's kind of shifting. The big box that we're kind of set up, and our zoning's kind of set up to do, isn't working as well. These mixed use kind of help the commercial pencil. So it can be a way to bring in commercial faster than it would come in, or even in places where maybe it wouldn't come in, because you have the housing element, which helps it pencil for developers, and then you have people to help support the businesses just right there. So that's one thing. Again, there's a trade-off.
What's the drive to bring the commercial?
Right, and that's the question. If we're okay with growing slower, that's fine. There is a monetary incentive to have it, and it's community commercial as well. So
I mean, that's just where I am. I don't feel the need to hurry up and grow.
right.
I want to live in a community, 8,000 or 9,000 people, and we have the things that we enjoy with some open space and some parks, and it doesn't take me 25 minutes to come off the bench to downtown,
Right.
because there's still a rural feel. So that's where I struggle is what, why the need to grow and facilitate the growth. Right.
Yeah, and that really, I mean, that's a big benefit to the city. So I mean, it is determining if that's worth it, if the growth is worth the benefit, if that benefit's even something we want. And again, we could be proactive and look to change. We could wait till things come in. If the feedback is no, we're not really interested in that from the Planning Commission, and that's what I'm hearing from both, then that just translates into what I tell developers as they come in. And what I have kind of been telling them is, I mean, they're basically, the vibe is, I mean, it's a little little leery of changing our commercial to residential. Like it's gonna have to be a heavy commercial, and even then, it's still not preferred. So that's kind of where we're at. But
Spencer, what typically drives your department to consider these zoning requests? For example, is it from developers or is it from North Logan citizens that own property that would like to use that property other than weeds or alfalfa?
you know, it's a mix of a lot of things. In some cases, developers will make a request. Those ones are typically difficult to work through, but a lot of times we work with them and get it through. In this case, it's the first thing that kind of brought it up was some tricky properties along Main Street that have been tough to fill. And you probably know which buildings we're thinking of, just without saying that, and trying to find out ways we can have those work. Another thing that brought it up was the area west of Main Street, where we put in CCA and it's just housing. And we thought, well, maybe instead of just housing, we have a mix. So those were kind of the two main questions that brought this. And then developers have kind of asked about it as well. So it's kind of the two angles in this one.
Well, then if someone asks, if someone wants to sell their land in North Logan City, you've got an obligation to address it and give them a thumbs up or a thumbs down, or at least I would imagine that you're not in a position to tell a landowner, no, I'm not going to consider your request. You have to follow through, don't you? Take it through certain steps, take it to this committee, then ultimately to the city council.
Yep, if we get an application, that's exactly correct. Generally how it works is they'll call and talk with us. I'll set up a meeting or just have a phone call with them. And they usually ask for a temperature check before they submit any applications. And that's where I'll talk to them. But we are very careful to make it clear that we're not denying or approving anything. We just kind of try to give the feeling of the Planning Commission, City Council. And oftentimes they take that and they say, okay, this doesn't feel likely based on that feedback, and they won't submit. Or if they feel like they disagree with our opinion and want to submit anyway, yeah, we would take it to Planning Commission and City Council. So, but most of the time we kind of meet with them and figure out what's going to work or not. And a lot of the questions we get are preliminary. They're just testing the waters. They a lot of times have maybe just barely reached out to see if it's for sale or just seen a listing and they call the city first. So they're not very far along in the process.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
One of our greatest needs in the city is retail, particularly clothing options. And so we want to preserve as much as possible our rural feel, but still there's a need and a demand for people to go shop within our community.
Businesses they don't make it anymore. Right, empty buildings all down Main Street. Right. So, you know, that's where I struggle with it. You know, the stuff exists out there, the use for that. So I feel like the need's been met, and it's met by Amazon.
Still, a lot of the ladies like to be able to go shopping, take a look at things, and I learned this recently that North Logan has the highest percentage of senior citizens of any community within the valley. So, and a lot more people are coming when retired and so on.
Well, but I think the commercial space is there. That's not what's the question. The question is, do we want to stack hundreds of people on top of that?
Yep.
So we want to keep it open to developers.
Yeah, I think the zoning that's there, yeah, you know, if they come in and it fits within that. It's the residential stuff that I think I struggle with.
Right, having a tremendous
Well, there's a
number
lot of
more of
pressure
people.
to take our commercial area and somehow squeeze in residential into it.
Right. Yep. Yeah, and that is the request, and
Because it's, I don't feel like we, we're short, we have a shortage of commercial space right now.
no.
It's just, this is their way around trying to get those things. Because there is a demand.
I think there's truth to that, and I think the big thing is right now. I mean, it sells really well right now, and so they're trying to figure out ways to develop residential and a mixed use is a way that they can take a little. In their eyes, they see it as a little hit by adding a little commercial, but still get the housing to make up for it.
You're exactly right.
And the thing that we've told them frequently is that we're kind of looking at a larger time scale. So right now, residential, high density residential, I mean, if you rezone the whole city, we'd have applications in a month. But we're looking at a longer time frame, and we don't want to give up something for what's going to develop right now.
Yeah,
So.
and that's where I don't want to get lost in it. We feel the pressure to support the commercial. And I mean, we have empty vacant buildings all over the place.
Right.
But we look at that, and they're trying to take that spin that there's some appeal for that, but it's just so they can stack thousands of people on top of that in residential, because it is going to sell. There's a huge demand for it.
Mm-hmm.
But as a citizen of the community, I'm just struggling with where that pressure, why give up some of that, our rural community
Right.
for developers.
Okay. Yeah. Is that general, any more thoughts on that? General consensus type of thing?
Yeah, I think we're pretty much put an end point on that.
Okay, great.
All right, folks, how you feeling? Want to try and tackle one more? You had it for the night. Is there more?
There's one more, but it's not time sensitive. I put it on there because I figured this agenda would be quite a bit shorter. So really, I mean, we don't need to tackle this now if we don't want to. But I mean, if you guys really want to dig into it, I mean, I'm here for it.
This probably needs our full attention.
I'd say let's push it down the road.
Okay. Yeah, sounds good.
Okay. All right, so we'll go to agenda item 4. Is there anything else we need special review, any discussion on any items, things coming up we need to be aware of?
Yeah, one thing is we discussed in city council last night with meetings. So they talked about, and Brad was there as well, so he can chime in if I'm misspeaking, but they talked about taking the meetings in December and potentially shifting to one meeting on the second week of December instead of having 2 meetings in December, one in the first week and one in the third week. We typically only have about 1 meeting in December. The meetings have been fairly light. I believe the conclusion there was to kind of keep agendas open on that second week in December and kind of see how the agendas worked out, see if there were a lot of items. Right now, we've kind of had a lull in applications, but that's kind of the feelings now. I'm sure many of you will object to that because you want to add another meeting to your Christmas schedule because you love being here, but it's just a thought. Would there be any objections to following kind of with what the city council does and going to that one meeting if they do that?
I agree. My calendar correctly, would that be for us, 7/10?
I believe so. I mean, is that the right date?
Yeah.
Yep. So it'd be the 10th.
I think everybody here would be just fine with that.
Great. So we'll plan on just having one meeting in December, and we will have our second meeting this month as well. So if we come back and have short-term rental an ordinance to look at. Our public hearing would probably be in that second week in December. So, yeah, that's it for me.
All right. With that, then, I would entertain a motion to adjourn our meeting.
So motion.
Motion by Craig, is there a second?
Second.
Second by Lloyd, all in favor? Aye. Meeting adjourned.